Om Asatoma Satkamaya Tamasoma Jyotirgamaya Mrityorma Amritam Gamaya Aviravirmayeti Rudrayatte Takshinam Mukham Tenamam Pahi Nityam. May the Divine lead us from the unreal to the real, from darkness to light, from death to immortality. May the Divine Consciousness fill our hearts and protect us. So last week we saw verse 47 of chapter 2, which gives a very good summary, a gist of the karma theory. The next 4 or 5 verses will continue to elaborate on that idea. As we have seen before, the word karma has entered into mainstream English language. Everybody feels that they know what karma is. People use the term anytime and all the time. And so, along with some correct understanding of karma, there is also a lot of additional layers on the theory have been added, and which creates a lot of confusion, a lot of questions, a lot of doubts. And so if we read these 4 or 5 verses very clearly in the second chapter, we will see that karma theory, first of all, it's a theory. It's not a dogma. It's not that everyone have to accept this whole thing about karma. It's only a theory. And like any theory, it is meant to answer the kind of questions that come to mind. It's a theory because it cannot be proved, nor can it be disproved. All that we can say is karma theory provides us a way to think, and that way of thinking is able to answer many of the questions that we have in our own personal life and in collective life as well. It's possible that some people might say, this way of thinking doesn't make sense to me, or I don't like it, which is fine. No one is pushing the karma theory down anyone's gullet. If you don't like it, then the idea is find something else that you like. The questions still exist. Questions about inequality, questions of regarding what is perceived as injustice, that things are not fair, it's unfair, and so on. Those questions will remain. And we have to figure out whether we have any theory in mind which makes sense. One way is to just give up and say, none of this makes sense. And then remain with that non-answer. The other way is to try to find, is there a way of thinking which kind of puts it all into place? And karma theory is one such way of trying to understand the things that are happening around us. So the basics of that karma theory we saw in verse 47 last week. So just to summarize very quickly, that as long as the ego is present, karma is inevitable, action is inevitable. And by ego is meant the sense of I that is present in us right now. What the Gita will point out is that our present sense of I is a kind of a fake I, if you like. That behind this ego, there is another I, which is the real I. Right now, we are only reading about that real I in the Gita, which is what Krishna describes in the first half of this chapter, the nature of the Atman, birthless, deathless, and so on. That's our real I, that the real me inside every one of us was never born, will never die. It's pure and perfect and free, which is good news. The bad news is we don't feel that way right now. We just feel I was born someday. We feel I'm going to die one day, and so on. So my present I doesn't match with the description of the real I given in the Gita. And that's why our present I, call it the ego or you call it the fake I, whichever you like. But as long as this ego is present, the ego really, as we saw last time, is a kind of shrinking of that real I. If that real me is infinite and all-pervading, and now suddenly this all-pervading I is kind of reduced into this human figure, it has become small. First it was full and complete, now it has become small and incomplete. And once we become small and incomplete, there is the inevitable desire to complete oneself. We know that if you have an unsolved puzzle, only a few pieces in a jigsaw puzzle, for instance, then you want to complete it. You won't feel satisfied, you just leave it incomplete. So similarly, this little I, it feels incomplete. And so there is a kind of an emptiness inside, a kind of a hole, a sense of unfulfillment, a sense of I need something more than what I have now. And that's essentially at the base of every desire. Because I feel, and then of course in the kind of environment in which we live, the kind of consumeristic society in which we live, the purpose behind all the advertisements and all of that is to make us feel you need this. Without this, your life is futile. And so of course, we see all these ads and we think, I need that. Without that, how can I live? And so desires are there inbuilt, but desires are also being encouraged by the world in which we live. And therefore, karma becomes a way of fulfilling our desire. Because in order to, even if I have simple desire as fixing myself a cup of tea, you still have to get up and fix yourself a cup of tea. That karma is essential. So desire leads to karma. And that desire is because of the sense of incompleteness. So right now, when we are still being controlled by the ego, the fake I, we don't have a choice between saying, I don't want to do karma. There is no choice. As long as this little I is there, we will do. The only choice we have is, should I do good karma or bad karma? And by good, how do you define? Now, good and bad are pretty vague terms in some ways. And then different ways of defining what good is. Some people might say, in religious terms, any karma that will take me nearer to God, nearer to my spiritual ideal, is good karma. Any karma that takes me away from that is bad karma. Or, as Swami Vivekananda pointed out, anything that makes me strong. So it's not simply in religious terms. Anything that makes me strong, physically, mentally, emotionally, intellectually, spiritually, of course, is good karma. Anything that makes me weak, which will mean if we take regular physical exercises, do a workout, or read some good, healthy literature, even if it's fiction, but it is something that uplifts me, takes me closer, makes me a better person, then that would be a good karma. So that's one way to distinguish between good and bad karma. The other choice we have is to do this karma with desire or without desire. Now, nobody does bad karma without desire. You can't say, I'm going to now steal, but I don't have any desire for it. It doesn't make sense. But why would anyone do karma without a desire? And that's because the karma that is done with desire has a nature to bind us. We get caught up in it. That is the kind of karma that increases stress, anxiety, it increases exhaustion. But the karma done without desire will not do any of this. And that's essentially what karma yoga means. that you continue doing good karma, why should I then do good if I don't desire the fruits? The first thing, as I said, and I mentioned this before, desire is yes, there is certain, always when we do some work, there is some motive behind it, clearly. Nobody does work without any motive. But once I start doing a work, then I can almost let go of the desire. Because if I do the work, the fruit will come, whether I desire it or not. It's like if you're playing a game, say a baseball game, then of course, both the teams playing it, each team wants to win. That's the motive. They want to go to win. But then, all that they need to do then is to play as best they can. But every moment, they're thinking, I've got to win, I've got to win, I've got to win. A part of the mind then is actually being caught up in that idea that I need to win, so I'm not able to give my full attention to the work itself. So if someone says, I'm just going to do my best, and then whether I desire or not, that work will yield its result. So in that sense, expecting something is a totally useless activity because work will yield its fruit. Now, if I don't desire it, then it will lead to what the book says, a chitta shuddhi, purification of heart. So I continue doing good. Instead of it, if it's successful, you get the result, but you get an extra result in that your heart is purified. You're not caught up. The work doesn't bind you. So these are the three important takeaways from the verse that we saw last time. First, as long as the ego is present, work is inevitable because of the sense of incompleteness. Second, the only choice we have is doing between good or bad work. And if we're doing good work, the other choice we have is, should I do that work with desire, seeking the results, or without any expectation? And the reason for that is the work done with expectation of the results leads to pain and sorrow, ultimately rebirth, as we saw. One way to ask the question, why are we born at all? And people have question about rebirth, but it's good to have question about the birth itself, even before we question rebirth. Why? We simply take it for granted that being born is natural, but being reborn, I have my doubts about it. But if we have doubts about rebirth, I think we should have doubts about this also. Like, why are we here? And one way of answering that question is, we are here to work out the result of the karma. Well, karma of my past birth. But what about the first time I was born? What karma I had then? Because that was my first time. And the answer is, there's never a first time. Now that might seem like a way to avoid answering the question. But it's a little bit like asking, where does the circle start? And where does it end? The circle doesn't start anywhere. You go on going in a circle and you can go on endlessly. Now, does that mean that our births have been infinite? Or did we have a first birth? Now, philosophically, we have got to say this birth and rebirth, or birth and death, if it were beginningless, it would also be endless. Then there is no question of moksha. And so the idea is that all that we can say is we don't know. We don't know when this all started. Now, again, that might seem to be like, oh, you're just avoiding the answer. You don't have an answer. Not quite. And the example is a little bit like this. Now, most of us, when we go to sleep, we see different dreams. And sometimes they say that we don't just see one dream every night, we see series of dreams. And usually the only dream we remember is the last dream before waking up. In any case, think about this scenario. Let's say I go to sleep at 11 o'clock at night. Then by 11:15 I'm fast asleep. By 11:30 my dream starts. And in my dream, after 5 minutes into my dream, I meet my grandfather on a bank of a river. Now, if someone were to ask me that time, when did this world start in which you were there? I'm not going to say it started 5 minutes ago. Actually, that is the reality. It did start 5 minutes ago because the dream started at 11:30. The whole world came into being at 11:30. And I'm into my dream. So that world is only 5 minutes old, which really means my grandfather and I are same age, which means the river that is flowing by and I were born at the same time. But that's not how we see the world. We see that the mountains and the rivers and the galaxies have been there thousands and hundreds of thousands of years ago. There are people who are older than me. There are people who are younger than me. And yet, it's possible that all of these things have come at the same moment, and yet along with the idea that things have come before. So that's the difficulty in trying to answer when did it all begin. So just as we cannot definitively say when the dream world begins, because there are a series of answers. You could say it's 5 minutes ago, or you could say it started with the Big Bang in my dream. That's the reason that we cannot answer the question, when was the first birth? But we know that while if we continue moving in a circle that's endless, it is possible to get out of the circle totally, not be a part of the circle anymore. And that is what moksha is. No one is forcing us to moksha. Moksha is not something that will happen by default. It doesn't have to. If we don't do anything about it, we'll continue going in a circle. And as long as it's a kind of a merry-go-round, as long as we are enjoying it, no need to do anything about it. But it's possible that sometimes this merry-go-round can change into a sorrow-go-round. Then, of course, we don't want to. I remember when I was very young, you have this big Ferris wheel. You call it Ferris wheel, right? I remember I was probably I might have been, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 years old with my father. I sat in the Ferris wheel. And it was very exciting. It was like big wheel and it was going up. But then, as long as it was going slowly, it was kind of good. But then they really speeded it up. It was really going pretty fast. And I started crying and yelling and this thing. And my father was like, oh, how do you control this little child? So that's essentially what I mean by something that can be funny, that can be enjoyable. But who knows? The same thing that is enjoyable can become very painful. We don't know. And that's the reason a work will lead to a rebirth, and it's kind of a Groundhog's Day scenario, like that movie. The things will keep on repeating over and over and over again. Somebody was saying that I'm not so terrified by rebirth, but just the idea that I have to go to the school again and do all those assignments and all of that and go through the whole thing. That is why I want moksha, if for nothing else. So, whatever reason you might have, but if you want to do all of this all over again, don't read the Gita. If you want to say, no, I want something different, then this is the book to read. So that's the 3 or 4 points to be kept in mind. Now this will be fleshed out a little bit more in the next verse 48. Yogasthav guru karmani sangam tyaktva dhananjaya siddhya siddhyo samo bhutva samatvam yoga uchyate. O Dhananjaya, Do all work while dwelling in yoga, abandoning attachment and remaining unaffected by success or failure. Such evenness of mind is called yoga. Do all work while dwelling in yoga. Yoga stha. Stha means to dwell in something. Yoga stha means to dwell in yoga. Now, what does dwelling in yoga mean? It means to be aware that neither the work nor the goal nor the fruits are the goal, but something beyond them both. And that's something important to keep in mind. Whenever we do work, what is it that sometimes the work itself can be very attractive, something we enjoy doing. And that's fine. That could be one motivation, that I enjoy doing what I'm doing. The second motivation will be the work will yield some result, which is what I want. So either it's the work itself or the result of the work. But dwelling in yoga means, yes, the work can be very meaningful, the result can be very attractive, but the real purpose of work is neither the work itself, that's not the ultimate purpose, nor the result, but that there is something beyond them both. If that awareness remains behind every work that we do, that yes, it is meaningful, it is great, but its ultimate purpose is not work. Now, workaholics are not karma yogis. Workaholics are like work, and then work itself, and they might do amazing things. So doing a lot of work and helping a lot of people and doing great and being successful is great. But good to keep in mind, however meaningful and wonderful as that might be, that itself cannot bring us complete fulfillment. Even that will leave some kind of an emptiness inside still. And that's what dwelling in yoga means, that recognizing that the purpose of everything is more than simply the work that we are doing, more than simply the results that we are seeking. Abandoning attachment. Sangam tyaktva means abandoning attachment. Now, attachment itself can be to three different things. First, and this is very common, attachment to the result. That I'm doing a certain work to get a certain result. And as I said before, we need to separate the idea of motivation from the idea of result. Yes, we start work with some motivation, with some result in mind. That's perfect. But how much attached should I get to the result? Because as we just saw, if I work hard and if the work is successful, the result will come. My getting attached to it doesn't change anything, doesn't change the outcome. But if I get attached to the result, and if I don't get the result I want, it's going to make me profoundly miserable. But if I'm not attached to the result, then I'll still be sad, but the level of sadness will be a little less. So first is attachment to the fruits. Second is attachment to the work itself. Sometimes people don't care for the fruit, but they're attached to the work. That's why there are some people who look forward to a weekend, but when the weekend comes, they don't know what to do. Because there's a whole empty space now. They don't know how to fill up the time that they have. So second is attachment to the work itself. And finally, attachment to the one who is doing the work, this ego. So we have to keep these three attachments at the back of the mind. The last one, attachment to the ego, is the most difficult one to get over. It's sometimes possible with some effort to say, I'm just going to work hard, going to do a good thing, and not get attached to the result. Sometimes it's possible not to get too much attached to one's work. But this attachment to the ego, Attachment to the ego shows itself through its identification with the ego. I mean, that's one way that you can see the work and its fruits are different from the ego. Because no matter how much attached I am to the work, how much attached I am to the fruits, I still know that they are different from me. The work is not who I am. The results are not who I am. I'm attached to them, but they are not who I am. But the ego is not like that. So attachment to the ego is really an identity with the ego. That the sense of I is who I am. And that's why if the sense of I is taken away, it can be terrifying. Now, nowadays, the anesthesia they give is pretty effective. They'll just give it to you and you don't even know. You just lose all sense. But if it is slowly, if you are losing the sense of I gradually, that can be for many people very terrifying. It happened in the case of Narendranath when Vivekananda was very young during one of his early visits to Ramakrishna. And Sri Ramakrishna saw such a fit and pure soul who has come. And he was a little bit impatient to kind of give him that highest realization right away. And so he just went and kind of touches him on the back. And just that touch of Ramakrishna, Vivekananda later described, this whole thing started whirling and things started melting away. All the forms started disappearing. And as it was happening, this Narendranath kind of shouted, "What are you doing to me? He was, I think, 18 years old that time. But I've got my parents at home." And that's what can happen. When that sense of I is going away, you just want to hold on to it, because the idea is, if this I goes away, then it's just like end of me. I cannot exist without my I. That's the idea. That's the fear. That's the experience. And that's why this attachment to the ego is really the identity with the ego. And that's the toughest to leave. But we can at least begin with the earlier ones of not getting too much attached to the results, not getting too much attached to the work itself. And to the extent we succeed in doing that, eventually we will succeed in not getting attached to the ego. The only way we'll not get attached to the ego is when we start getting some glimpse of the real I behind. Because we don't want to let go what we have in anticipation of what we don't have. Usually, people want to make sure that there is something else to hold on to before you let go of this. And that's one of the challenges of letting go of the ego. And it's also the dilemma, really. We cannot hold on to the little I and experience the big I at the same time. We have to let go of the one to see the other. We can understand that better when we look at the example of the rope and the snake. If there is a coiled rope in a semi-lit room and I walk into the room, I mistake it for a snake. I switch on the light and I find, no, it's not a snake, it's only a rope. So now there are apparently two. It's actually the rope. I mistook it for a snake. But there are not really two things. It's just the rope. If I see the snake, I cannot see the rope. If I see the rope, I cannot see the snake. I cannot see both at the same time. The ego and the Atman are a little bit like that. The Atman, the real I, is the rope here. The ego is the snake. Now, we don't want to let go of this little I because we feel then it's a fear of, in philosophical term, they use the word non-being. Being and non-being. Non-being is essentially the experience of impermanence. that everything in the world is perishable. All the material world, everything has an expiry date. That's a way non-being manifests in the world. And it's terrifying. That's why we grieve when something that is dear to us, especially not just material objects, but people who are close to us, they go, we grieve because it's the being kind of getting sucked into non-being. And so this I, my ego, seems to give me the sense of being. And therefore I'm afraid to let go of this I. And as we saw last time, the reason we confidently go to sleep every night is because of faith that next morning I'm going to wake up and get my I back. If that guarantee were not there, we would be afraid to go to sleep, because sleep is really losing my I. In fact, and you see, when I lose my I, the world goes away. I can't say, I want to keep on seeing the world, I just want the I to go away. It doesn't. The I and the world are connected. And therefore, that's the challenge. If I have to get hold of the real I have to let go of this little I. But there's one story, very briefly I can mention, because I've mentioned it several times before. This one person went on a hike and kind of didn't time it well. It became very dark, didn't have a flashlight, and wasn't able to figure out where things are. Everything turned very dark, and didn't realize he was on the edge of a cliff. And so he took a wrong step and just fell headlong into the kind of steep wall in a deep valley. He was falling and he's kind of trying to grasp something to hold on to. And then luckily, he found one small tree jutting out of that wall of the cliff. And he was able to hold on to it and prevent from this complete total fall. And so there he is, kind of suspended on the cliff wall, holding on to that tree. It's night. He's in a remote part of that national park. And he's hoping there will be some help nearby. And so he just kind of shouts, is there anyone? Help, help, is there anyone? No answer. He keeps on saying, is there anyone? And then luckily, because he was he must have done some prayer at home or so on. So he remembered God and said, please, please, help, help. And so the story goes on to say, the clouds parted, and a divine voice said from above, my child, don't be afraid. I'm here to help you. Just let go of that tree. And look at this poor guy. It's dark. The only support he has is this tree that he's holding on to. And God's voice tells him, let go of the tree. He thinks for a moment and then looks up again and says, is there anyone else up there? and it doesn't have a happy ending, unfortunately, the story, because, of course, there is no one else up there. In that remote part of the park, there was nobody. So this person is just holding on. Night comes, it's very cold. And next morning, when the people were passing by that valley, they found this man suspended from the tree, almost dead in that cold, with no protection. And that tree was only 5 feet above the ground. So when God's voice said, let go, he had just let go and he would have landed very safely. But in the dark, he had no way of knowing how deep the valley is. That's what I mean of the fear of letting go. And that's what happens. Because really, even this very moment, if I can let go of this ego, it's easier said than done. But just imagine, if I can let go of this little I will find that this big I, the real I, is already present. It's not going to come from somewhere. It's already here. Just like the rope is hidden by this false snake I'm seeing, this real I is hidden by this ego to which I'm clinging. And if I just let go of it, I'll be an enlightened being this very moment. So, enlightenment is not that difficult conceptually. But when we try to practice it, we find how tough it is. It's like almost looking up and saying, is there any other way? I can't let go of this I. That's the challenge. So abandoning attachment, sangam tyaktva, meaning attachment to the fruit, attachment to the work, attachment to the ego. The last one, as I said, is the most difficult. Remaining unaffected by success or failure. And this will happen only if I am unattached to the fruit. If I'm attached to the fruit, I will be affected by success or failure. If I'm not attached, and how one might say two things. First is this. Not attached doesn't mean I'm just going to be like stone-faced. If it's success or failure, no change. That's not the point. That's not what is meant. We are human beings. Even a wall is not affected by success or failure. That doesn't mean a wall is enlightened, that a wall is a karma yogi. So, not being affected doesn't mean that nothing will happen here. If there is success, we'll be happy. Being happy is not a crime. And being happy is fine, it's natural. There is a heart here. If there is successful, of course we are going to be happy. If things don't work out, of course we are going to be unhappy. So being happy or unhappy itself is not the problem. The problem is if these things overwhelm me to the point I become incapable of doing anything else. That's the problem. That if I fail and I'm just like so depressed and I'm unable to do anything and I'm next day can't go to work and I sleep for 10 hours and nothing happened, then it's a problem. Or if I'm so happy that I go out and do something absolutely crazy, then it's a problem. So in some ways, the result of extreme success or extreme failure or the reaction, extreme reaction to success or failure may not be different. My most favorite example, and because I live in the Fenway area with the ballpark so close by, this is my most favorite example. About 20 years ago, until about 20 years ago, the Red Sox hadn't won the World Series for almost, I think, 80 years, 8 decades. And so there was like a forever sentimental favorite of people, oh, they don't win. And so then finally, around 20 years ago, they won. They won and people were so happy. And that exuberance of joy, they came and did a lot of ransacking. The police came and there's a lot of, again, there was some, what do you call those? Pepper sprays and all those. So there was a lot of damage and destruction of public property that occurred. A couple of years later, they lost and the people came and they did the same thing. So even when they won or even when they lost, the final result wasn't very different. And extreme reaction, extreme joy or extreme sorrow, both can be very painful. And that's why the words that get often used in religious texts is be contented. Yes, be cheerful. But there are the two Sanskrit words called Uddharsha and Avasada. Avasada means being forever depressed. If something doesn't go right, my mood gets off for the next 2 days. That's Avasada. So going to that depth of depression is not helpful. And Uddharsha, something good happens and I start jumping and yelling. That kind of over-celebration, overdoing it is not good either. Can I kind of remain somewhere in the middle? Yes, sometimes being a little sad, sometimes being happy, but still in control. And that is essentially what remaining unaffected by success or failure means. And then finally, samatvam yoga uchyate, evenness of mind. Evenness of mind is called yoga. So when all these three kinds of attachments are removed, attachment to the fruits, attachment to the work, and attachment to ego, then that complete evenness of mind will come. But even before that complete evenness comes, we can at least try to get at least a 10% evenness, maybe 20, 30. We can at least strive for it. Because yes, 100% evenness will come, might take time. But we can begin taking baby steps and strive for that. So even practicing these things imperfectly, not doing it perfectly, but trying to do it, even that kind of an effort, we'll able to see the difference it makes in our life. Being perfect might take time, but doing things imperfectly, trying, no matter how often we fail, itself we will see that it makes a big difference in our lives. Okay, let me just read the next words quickly and then we will stop today. Durena yavaram karma buddhi-yoga dhananjaya buddhau sharanaman vichcha kripana phalahetavaha. Work done with desire is far inferior to the work done with the mind in yoga, O Dhananjaya. Seek refuge in the mind in yoga. Those who desire fruits are pitiable. This is one very important point to keep in mind. The word buddhi comes very often, and Buddhi-Yoga. So that buddhi, that mind, which puts me in a state of yoga. By state of yoga is meant, as we saw earlier, samatvam, evenness of mind. So when that state of yoga, when my buddhi remains with that evenness of mind, then with that buddhi, take refuge in that buddhau sharanam anvichcha. That is the kind of buddhi we should strive to have in our life. Because ups and downs occur everywhere. We are seeing it right now, even in the world. If a new administration comes in, lots of upheavals occur. And many of us are being personally affected by the changes that occur. But how do we handle ourselves in these external changes, many of which over which we have no control? There are changes occurring not simply at the national level, but simply even at the level of our workplace or our family. Changes are occurring, and most of them are initiated by forces over which we have no control. The only control I have is how do I deal with these changes? Am I overwhelmed by them so that I become incapable of dealing with them wisely? Or I'm able to take them in my stride, and no matter how difficult or challenging a situation might be, I'm going to say, okay, this is the way, this is my plan of action, this is how I'm going to do it. And that's the kind of buddhi, evenness of mind, surrender to that buddhi, take refuge in that kind of a mind, because those who desire fruits are kripanaha, are pitiable. But pitiable is meant when it's like the one example that comes is, for instance, if sometimes people have a sweet tooth. They just love sweets. And sometimes it might happen that maybe their health conditions require that they keep away from sugar-rich foods. And the doctors and the family and everyone will say, don't eat that. But if that's what I crave for, and in spite of the best advice around, I still go and eat it, people are just going to say, what can you do to this person? You just kind of pity that person. That in spite, it's not as if when we do things that should not be done, we don't always know that we shouldn't do them. A lot of things that we do, we know deeply that that's not what I should do, or the way of thinking that we have, we know that a certain way of thinking just brings me more pain, but I cannot stop thinking that way. Now, that is the kind of condition, he says, are pitiable. And the only way, it's not as if we're just lost. It is possible to get out of that condition, and that's why we need a strong willpower, a firm determination that I will not allow external forces to control the destiny of my life. That kind of a willpower, I can come out of it. I have the power within me, but you'll have to summon up that willpower. And that willpower, the strengthening of the willpower, comes through living a life of principles and values, an ethical life, a moral life, a life according to dharma, being truthful, honest, unselfish, kind, helpful. One who lives that way has a tremendous energy. Such people have a better willpower than someone who has no morals, no principles. Such people can't raise themselves when they fall deep into this morass. That's the idea. So we will stop here today. If you have any thoughts, ideas, yes.
Swamiji, this is the question I think you asked me to ask again last year, last week. I think I got a little bit of answer from today's lecture, that we can tell somebody to, if they want to avoid unhappiness or being sad, if the karma leads them to unsuccess or it is not successful. So that is one way to convince, but it is somehow always I feel that it is very difficult to convince younger generation, telling that, hey, don't do it with the...
Yeah, that's true. Please sit down. So, in Bengali, sometimes they say, I'll translate it. So there are different ways people learn. Sometimes we see that, and especially younger generation, parents and grandparents, when you're trying to tell that to the younger members of the family. So some people you tell them something, they take it to heart, and they will follow it. So just by your telling them. Some will do it if they see a certain living example thereby. So a lot of times, especially the elders in a family, and we can remember that from our own because when we were very young, what are the things we learned from the elders around us? Yes, and as we are growing up, we get lots of advice. And then when we grow old enough, then we start giving advice. And that's the way life goes. But what kind of advice impacts us more? And oftentimes we see that if an advice comes from someone who we trust or we believe as that person follows that advice in their own life, then it will have a greater impact. And so sometimes in a family situation, for parents and grandparents, if you want to impart a certain teaching to your children or the younger members of the family, because of course you have to tell them what they should do or what they shouldn't do. But a lot of learning occurs, especially when the children are very young, but what they see their parents are doing, not so much by what they hear the parents are saying. And so the second way of learning is by actually seeing what other people do. And actually a lot of our education that occurs may not so much to the words that we hear, but what our eyes see, how people are living. And then there are some who may not learn in spite of the advice, in spite of seeing living examples, and then they just have to then get hurt themselves in order to hopefully learn. It's like to kind of give a somewhat silly example, but an example we can understand. It's good to tell. It's not, we don't see it often here, but in India it's pretty common. Sometimes people will eat bananas and just throw the skin on this thing, and there's no trash cans everywhere, just like we have it mostly everywhere here. And so it's a good advice to tell youngsters, you're walking, be careful, look down, and then don't step on a banana peel. And if the child is obese, and then they will not slip and fall down. But sometimes they might they might see someone slip on the banana peel and fall down. They say, oh, I better be careful. I don't want that to happen to me. Usually that works. But sometimes people are like, well, that person slipped, but doesn't mean it's going to happen to me. I'm going to try it out. And they'll slip, that they'll have to then at some point, consciously or unconsciously, step on a banana peel, fall down, get hurt, and then the next time say, oh, I'm never going to do that again. I'm going to be very careful. But there are also a few people who have not fallen the banana peel only once in their lifetime. They can follow it over and over again. So there are these levels of learning. And so we have to do the best we can in teaching. And same thing with regard to, if you want to impart this idea of karma to someone, do the best we can. I mean, yeah. And sometimes, as they say, that only when the right time comes, people are willing to listen. But as elders in a family, we just have to keep on. Mothers usually do it more than fathers, I think. Keep on nagging, and sometimes we'll have a teenage child and we say, Mom, how many times are you going to tell me that? But it's good to, you see, in the Upanishads, it's not as if every page in the Upanishad, the new teaching is there. When you read the Gospel of Ramakrishna, it's not as if every page a new story is there. There is lots of repetition. You read a few religious texts, you're going to find lots of repetition. And so, repetition in Vedic study, a Vedic study has certain rules. Now, repetition is considered a defect in any good text. Shankaracharya, in his commentary on the Upanishad, points out, he said, oh, this is the idea, but this has been said before. It's a repetition. And then Shankaracharya points out in his commentary, it's a repetition, but this is not a defect. And he says, just like, and this is the example he gives. He said, just like mothers, out of love for their children, will keep on telling them over and over and over again, because they love the child. They want the child to learn something. Even if the child gets annoyed at it, the mother will keep on telling. And he says, the Upanishads, at home, you might have just one mother at home. The Upanishads are like 1,000 mothers put in together. So they are going to nag endlessly because there's a wrong way of thinking and doing that we have learned over God knows how many millions of lives. In order for us to change that kind of a muscle memory or doing things in a stupid way, the Upanishad will keep on repeating again and again. And that's what we have to do. Yeah.
That's the karma phala, right? But the experience of being happy deep down is also a desire. Like, I want to be happy, and so I'm choosing to be happy. So,
no, experience of being happy is not the desire for happy. A desire for happy is when you're not happy. You see, if I'm not happy, then I desire happiness. And then when something good happens, I'm experiencing happiness. So desire for happiness and the experience of happiness are two different things. It's like the desire for mango and eating a mango and enjoying it are two different things. Think about it, okay? Yeah. Yeah, okay, good. You go first, yeah.
I had a question based on something you said last week. In that, when we think about karma theory, it's not only about our actions but our thoughts themselves, and that our thoughts can accrue karma, good or bad. But at the same time, this week work and let any thoughts that happen naturally occur.
Yeah, the idea is that when we do work, some things are going to work out well, some things are not going to work out well. And that's the story of everyone's life. Everyone in their life have enjoyed a few successes, experienced a few failures. What ideally people want, which doesn't really occur in life, is like, I want everything to go perfectly. Everything should be successful. I should be happy all the time. That never happens. So just being realistic about it, that some things are going to work out, some things are not going to work. If I accept that premise, and it's not just a theory, because just I look at the lives of everyone around me, sometimes they are happy, sometimes they are not. And I'm just one of them. I'm just one of the billions of people in the world. Every one of us likes to think that we are very unique. But in many respects, we are not. We're just like everybody else. And so, if we accept that some are going to be good, things are not going to be good, that evenness becomes a little easier. But the resistance comes because I want everything perfect, everything good. Then there is a problem. And when I said it's okay to be happy or sad, just to distinguish that we are different from a lifeless wall, because a wall also is never happy or sad. So therefore, this is not to say that, oh, something good happens to me and I'm like, I don't care. It's not that kind of a non-attachment. So if something good happens, it's fine to be happy. Something bad happens, of course we'll be sad. But in both, our happiness and sadness should be under my control. And what does being under my control means? Usually what happens is, whether it's success or failure, if it occupies my mind to the extent, then whatever next thing I'm doing, I'm not able to put my whole mind to it. Either I become giddy with success or I'm just depressed by failure. Then it's not under my control. But being under my control is, yes, I'm happy, but now I need to put my attention somewhere else. And in that activity doesn't keep on bothering me. So that's the goal here. Okay? Yeah. Okay. Anything else? Okay, so we will stop here today. When we begin next week, we'll start with verse 50. Om Jananim Saradam Devim Ramakrishnam Jagadgurum Padapadme Tayo Shritva Pranamami Muhurmuhu.